Hello, Yielders. We are the Matterhorn Yielders. I'm your host today, Jackie, and we have.
Japheth.
And.
I'm George Lucas. I'm here. I heard you guys are talking about me, so I wanted to, you know,
Control the situation.
direct things, even though I'm not a director, but I'm going to direct it.
So, we are talking about one of the more famous directors, George Lucas. We've been talking about different individuals like Jim Henson,
Bob Iger.
Bob
We
Iger,
did a Stan Lee.
Stan Lee. So today we're going to be talking about George Lucas and his contribution to the industry, the world. So George Lucas was born May 14th, 1944 in Modesto, California. He's the son of a small town stationer, and a mother who is often hospitalized for long periods for ill health, which led him to read a lot of books and comic books and different like classic adventures and stories, which helped him create those stories that we now see in film that he's directed. He became interested in filmmaking while in high school, but his real desire was in cars. So he worked in like a mechanic shop when he was a teenager, and he loved like street racing and wanted to race cars as his like career. But he, at the age of 18,
He thought that wasn't very practical, so he went into the film industry because that seemed more like a reliable industry to get into.
well, at the age of 18, he got in a real bad car accident and it convinced him to stop racing.
It was gnarly looking, that picture.
Yeah.
I saw it in his biography and I was like, I had no context for the story because I only read my part, and I was like that. I was like, is that the tree that killed James Dean? Like he wrapped that car around that.
Yeah. He was interested in movie making and was encouraged by Haskell Wexler, which was a movie maker.
Your phone is really close to the
Oh.
mic, so we can hear the.
You just need to put it on airplane mode.
Yeah.
I thought it was me, and I was like, I'm on airplane mode.
I know. I was like, I'm way over here. I'm not even using my phone.
Jack is like, what are you talking about?
I need to read this. Okay, we're good. Yeah, so he became interested in filmmaking, and he was encouraged by Haskell Wexler. I looked at some of his movies. I didn't really recognize any of the movies he directed, but they were a bit older, so
You're so uncultured. Golly.
yeah.
Uncultured swine.
Good old David.
Right?
He went to school and he graduated from the University of Southern California in 1966.
That's like a really good film school.
Yeah.
You made a lot of contacts there.
Yeah, they like list a bunch of people who graduated from that school.
He was the next he was a part of the next generation of directors that changed the movie industry.
Yeah. Yeah, he got a degree in fine arts. He did try to join, after he graduated, he did try to join the Air Force. But one of the reasons was
He didn't want to go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
one of the reasons for refusal was he had several speeding tickets, which is funny because he's a racer, so that makes sense. Then he tried to join the U.S. Army, but showed mild forms of being diabetic. So, which led to the second refusal. So then he re-enrolled in the Southern California and a postgraduate student to research film production. And he was working part-time teaching assistant for the U.S. Navy class. So he instructed military cameras operators to develop documentary films. So he did contribute to the war efforts.
Vietnam, you had a lot of film that came out of that.
Yep.
And a lot of it was on television and people's living rooms.
Yes.
That was the first time the war came home.
Yes.
And so it was, and that deeply affected the public's opinion about
Public
this.
mood.
Mm-hmm.
It changed how things were done.
Yeah. During this time, he was working on a lot of like short films, but one of his big projects that he's well known for.
Star Wars.
No,
Oh, we're not talking about Star
we're
Wars.
not there yet.
All right.
This is the film that kind of was his.
Howard the Duck.
Howard the Duck, right?
This is the film that kind of got him on the map of the film industry. It's like THX 1138.
No.
There's a longer name.
1138. You got to say it right.
Oh.
THX 1138.
Peter's got to intro the intro, like the THX sound.
Oh, without a doubt. I'm totally using that. Without a doubt.
That's how I know what THX is.
That's
That's
how
how Dad tested his speakers in the living room.
That's how this episode is starting. You know? Instead of the regular intro, it's just the THX intro.
Every millennial's like, yeah,
Yes.
nostalgia sweeps across my body.
Yes.
Let's
Well,
do this.
When it was a student film, the name of the film was a lot longer, but
Yeah.
then they converted it into a movie. They shortened it. But so
It's
he.
a weird film. It's not a normal film.
Yeah, so he won the student film with it, the competition or whatever it's called. Sorry, my brain's not working properly. But
Mom brain.
yeah.
Come on, Jackie. They are expecting hard facts and accuracy.
You can go on
because-
Wikipedia.
So he won an award for it.
Yeah, you won an award.
Was it like a college award, or was it like an actual like academy?
Like a film
It's a
festival,
film
sort of.
festival.
Oh, he won a film festival.
He won the film festival, which led him a internship with a studio, Warner Brothers. That's it. Warner Brothers.
Robert Duvall's in that film.
Is he?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
he's the main.
He's the main guy?
Yeah,
Yes.
I may be wrong. Like Captain Hook is still French, and
Right.
and the one guy's dead from the Imagination Ride, which he's not.
Right.
He's coming to where we are in a couple
Yeah.
weeks, and I was like, I thought you were dead. I reported that you were dead.
Yeah, the film itself, I watched like little clips of it. It's weird.
It's a weird
It
film.
has the dystopic society that's controlled.
It's a little risque too.
It's got bald men in it. They're dangerous.
There's other parts too that's a little risque, but yes. And then, so yes, he got an internship, a 6-month internship with Warner Brothers, and he assisted Francis Ford
Coppola.
Coppola.
They were friends.
Big time.
They even towards like he would bring him onto the sets of Star Wars, and he was kind of like this father figure for him in the movie industry, where he kept trying to like, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is awesome, right? And he's like, dude, you're George. Like, you're big.
That was the one thing about George, is that he held on to his friends. Like he developed his friends, and they're big name friends. Francis Ford Coppola, Steven Spielberg. Like these are like,
Coppola did The Godfather, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was big.
that's a big one.
A big film.
And like it's just crazy. Like he has all these close friends that are like these big time people, and it's like, yeah, just come check things out. And he has a history of always doing that, and it's fun.
Yes. So he did the internship, and then following that, he yeah, so he helped Coppola with the Rain People film. Um, Lucas also shot portions of a documentary called Grimy Shelter. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought it was called Clean Shanty.
Basically, he worked on some other films and stuff. But then Warner Brothers gave him the opportunity to direct a feature-length version of his student film with Coppola executive producing. And Robert Duvall.
That's
is
the
in
one
it,
where
yeah.
okay, Robert Duvall was in that one.
Yes.
All right, I was right.
He was in the main one.
He was in the
The big
the
one.
big one, the big version of it.
Yes.
Not the student film.
I was like, that's pretty impressive.
He got him in
Yeah,
this.
Robert Duvall in college.
So the film was released 1971 with respectful reviews. So mixed reviews, I would say.
It's a weird
That's
movie.
George
so.
Lucas's life.
Mixed reviews.
Mixed reviews to hate.
Yes. But so then he moved on his second film, which was more well known, American Graffiti, 1973.
He was challenged to make that movie.
Yeah.
He said, "Why don't you make a comedy?" He's like, "Okay."
It's not even that funny.
It's not. But that's how it was
It's
told
a
to him. is-
snapshot of like teenage life.
Right.
Yeah,
I
in
didn't think
the
it's
60s.
beautiful. Yeah, it's that 50s, 60s kind of going down Main
It's like
Street.
that car life, that car life of that era.
Yeah, it's very Americana.
Yes,
Like if you think about
big
like you
time.
like if you get into the teenage mindset of what it was. I don't even know what it's like, but it's a snapshot in history, and that's what's really cool about that movie is if you want to know, what it was like, you have somebody direct a movie and kind of tell what it was. And I think that's really cool that he did that. And it definitely shows his personality with like cars.
Yeah. And what kind of helped him with this movie and led him into getting funding for Star Wars and such was he
This movie
made
did
it
well.
he made it under $1 million within a month, and it did well. So
Hey, you got the guy from Happy Days. You got
Right.
what's his name?
Ron,
Ron. You got Ron Howard.
yeah,
But he was on the other show as a little kid,
Right.
Andy Griffith Show.
Yeah.
And then you got Harrison Ford in there.
Yes.
He's in that, but no one knows who he is. He was a carpenter before that. He was,
pretty much wasn't a high profile name, that's for sure.
But you're watching movie, you're like, that's Harrison Ford.
Well, what was cool it's something like you learned, like when he was making that film, like he almost did every job. Like he literally made American Graffiti. Like you named it. He had his hands on it.
That's his personality. As I
Yes.
read about him.
He's
It's like
very hands-on.
it's called controlling.
Yes.
trust
If
issues.
he could act it, he probably would.
Can you imagine just a movie of George Lucas in every role?
Well, the thing is, like, you hear talk about the actors, about some of the takes for, like, making a Star Wars, and they talk about how he would just be like, yeah, I guess that's good enough. Like,
He would never give good feedback
No.
when it comes to it. Because he's probably sitting there going, I could do a better job. Get out of the way, Mark Hamill.
What is it? Is it faster and more intense? Is that his catchphrase?
Yes, that was his catchphrase.
Faster and more intense.
It changed as it got older, but
Yeah.
Yeah. 1971, he formed the production company Lucasfilm that we all know today, and which led him into Star Wars.
Howard the Duck. And so when he made Howard the no, that's that. I mean,
I hope you do because I'm not talking about Howard the
No,
Duck.
I know you're not. I mean, it's just a brief mention, but yeah. So he had this idea of after he had finished filming American Graffiti, he wanted to make. He actually was trying to get the rights to make a Flash Gordon movie.
Flash Gordon.
But he couldn't get the rights.
He couldn't get the treadmills.
Yeah.
And the blue screens just right for
No,
the
that
80s
happened
version.
later. That happened later.
That was horrible. The
was
best
pretty
part of
bad.
the whole movie is them just saying Flash Gordon.
Well, I mean, you get oh, what is it? Yeah. The theme song is the best part of that movie for sure, without a doubt. But we're not talking about Flash Gordon.
We should review that movie. That movie's horrible.
Is that one owned by Fox? I don't know.
I
who
don't know,
owns
but it
that
is
one.
awful.
It is. It's pretty bad. So he decided, he's like, well, I'm gonna make. So he kind of went back to his childhood. He's a person who loved fairy tales and stories and things like that, and so he wanted to make his own fairy tale, but he wanted to do a different take. And he goes, well, I mean, we've gotten these fairy tales from all different eras. They always take place a long time ago. Where haven't we seen a fairy tale take place? And so he goes, we haven't taken it to space before. We haven't done that before. So he literally writes out Star Wars, and he goes around pitching it to all the studios, and all the studios go, no, I don't get it. I don't get it at all. And so it's not even until American Graffiti gets released and is successful that he finally gets, Alan Ladd Jr. at 20th Century Fox to go, this director's got something. And so he pulled George Lucas and said, okay, what's your project? And he goes, I don't get your project, but I believe in you as a director. And through Alan Ladd, he was able to get 20th Century Fox to agree to make Star Wars. Even without really understanding what they were signing them up for. But one of the big selling points is because George wasn't very good. He wasn't a good salesman. He wasn't like Walt, who can pitch the world and be like, everyone's like, oh, I get it. He needed help. And so he got help from a friend of his, Ralph McCurry, to give the conceptual ideas behind give you what Star Wars would look like. And some of those classic Ralph McCurry, paintings and artwork directly, influenced the movies and the look of everything. Even up to the sequel trilogies, they still use Ralph McCurry's artwork and designs to design Star Wars. So they hold on to what Ralph McCurry did as definitely a template as to what Star Wars is supposed to look like even today. So that influence definitely was huge. So George Lucas, he had written out Star Wars, but it was too big. It was too much. It was the whole trilogy of movies, 4, 5, 6. And so he's like, well, I got to break it down. I can't do all of this. So his hope was that he was going to be...
Was it a new one?
What? Yeah, it was a new one. He went through several drafts of what Star Wars would eventually become Star Wars, but he eventually narrowed down the story to what we now know as A New Hope. And his hope was that movie would be successful enough that he can finish his story, but he did write it in a way that it could be a one-off and done if it was a flop, sort of thing.
Yeah, Star Wars kind of stands alone like that.
Right. So it doesn't necessarily, it could stand on its own. And
imagine if he
it'd be
did
fun.
that with Episode 2. He's like, well, this is gonna be the one-off. It's gonna be great.
Right.
Yikes.
And so they went off. They when they did the casting. I'm gonna avoid. There's a lot of documentaries about the making of Star Wars, so I'm gonna avoid a lot of those
There
stories.
was a guy in pink shorts,
Yes.
holding a boom
mic, man.
mic, and he
Yeah.
is famous to
He
this
is
day.
famous.
Sorry, it's too close. Scratch.
So then they went off. They did the casting. George Lucas was very adamant about not using big names for the primary cast. So he got
Doris Day's daughter.
Right, Doris Day's daughter, which she wasn't really known for very much at that time. And then you had Mark Hamill, and then Harrison Ford. He was just helping George Lucas with the casting because he worked with him on American Graffiti, and says, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Help me just read for these other people." And nobody else could do the part of Han Solo as well as
Story
Harrison
of his
Ford.
life.
Yeah.
And so they
George.
just kind of like, all right, you're Han Solo now. Like, he didn't necessarily want to use Harrison Ford, but George Lucas was like, you're Harrison Ford. Like, you're Han Solo. Like, you do it better than anyone that's come in and tried to read for the part. You nailed it. So he got the part. And then they did get Alec Guinness, which that was
He regretted.
he would later regret because it's not
It
that
overshadowed
Can you
his
put
great career.
Can you put a face what he played?
he played Obi-Wan.
He was Obi-Wan.
Okay. All right. I just
He
needed a
was
face.
well
He
established.
was well established in
well-known.
Hollywood. Like, he was a
The River Kwai.
Oh, okay.
Like, he was in. I mean, he did a lot of great films.
yes. And so like he later would talk about how like this role as Obi-Wan Kenobi overshadowed his fantastic roles that he played in the past, and only people would ask him about Star Wars. And so he's like, but he was specifically picked but he actually wanted the part when it was initially offered to him because he liked the role of the mentor. He liked that part of it. But
He is the best actor in that film.
oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. But he so then they go into filming in Tunisia, where they are filming the desert scenes of Tatooine. That's basically the only place that's like on location, except for some of the few scenes. Actually, no, that's all on soundstage. Everything else was on a soundstage except for Tatooine.
Yeah. They did go. There was the Central America for Yavin 4.
But that was more.
but
That
they
was
didn't
that was
film
more.
there. It's just
secondary
yeah.
photography. That wasn't like they filmed there. That was like But yeah, the cast there. They're just like, this sucks. They hated every moment of it because it's hot. It's hot in Tunisia, and they were dealing with like record high heats that they hadn't seen in over like 50 years, huge sandstorms, and they're just like, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do? Like, it was rough. And at that point, 20th Century Fox was all like, we want to cut your budget. Like, you're approaching your
threshold right there.
And 20th Century Fox was also going through pressure at the time because they weren't making a lot of good, successful movies at the time as well. So they had a lot of pressure on all ends to try to cut the budget wherever they could. And this experimental film of Star Wars that they still didn't even understand the concept of was kind of like, but Alan Ladd was like pushing hard to keep things going with George, but it put a lot of pressure on George Lucas during filming.
He became hypertensive, where he was having heart issues.
Yes.
He thought he was having heart attacks.
Right. And so it was extremely stressful.
controlling.
This is when he realized he can't do it all, because he was still trying to do it all.
He also had like a special effects team that was all like, they didn't give him anything.
We're going to talk about that,
Yeah.
because that's definitely a big story in itself, but there's a whole documentary just on that by itself. But yeah, it was very difficult, like they filmed most of the stuff in London in the sound stages there. And what made things difficult was that there was no overtime in London. Like 5 o'clock hit, everyone went home. There was no like one more take. It was just like 5 o'clock.
Just the union rules.
We go home.
Yeah.
And so that made things extremely difficult, which extended the shooting. Nobody believed in. Nobody there understood what they were filming. They're like, "This is weird." Like,
It wasn't linear how they filmed it. It was
Right.
fragmented.
Right, and they're like, there's this hairy dog running around everywhere. And yeah, it's like even like everyone was just like, I don't get it. Nobody understood it, but George Lucas was the only one that understood what was going on.
That's
He's like,
usually the
it
case
will
for
make
all his
sense
films.
one day.
Right. But eventually, through a lot of other pressure and things like that, he was eventually able to finish filming. They mentioned like the last week of filming was like chaotic because they were like filming like 3 different sections of the movie all at once. It was kind of intense. And so they finished that. They finished filming. He comes back to ILM, who he had hired to work on the special effects. And they had been working on it for like a year or a year and a half, something like that. And they had come up with 7 shots or something like that.
It was scary.
And they were
Yeah.
like not even usable. And so
He's
George,
like, we got this stuff, and it just was bad.
it was bad. And so George Lucas was like losing it at this point. Like he's like, so he fired the editor. He hired his wife to finish editing the film. Obviously, they weren't always on the same page. They disagreed a lot on the vision, but George is the visionary. George got his way on a lot of things. Obviously, there were some things that he couldn't do. There was a lot of things that he was limited by, like the technology of the day.
Yeah.
Because the techniques that you see in Star Wars, the filming techniques, the special effects, those didn't exist.
They invented it.
They
Yeah.
invented it. And so if you get a chance, watch the ILM documentary on
Yes.
Disney Plus. It is fantastic. And they tell the story of that.
It's probably one of the best documentaries on Disney Plus.
Yes,
Yeah.
easily. And so, and so they revolutionized how movies were made at that point. But while they were still editing, George, he had put together a somewhat of a cut to show to his friends. He always loved his friends' input, and they all hated it. Most of them were like, because they hadn't finished editing. So like, I think they said like some of like the space scenes he had put in like World War II.
He put World War II fighter
Fighter.
pictures. He's like, we're gonna do this,
Right.
because that's what they were basing it off of.
And so they're like, and everyone hated it. I think one of the only people that liked it was Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was like, yeah, I get it, yeah. You'll probably make like 60 million off of this. And George was like, I'll make 15. He was not very optimistic. He was feeling the pressure of everything.
But Spielberg introduced him to the music.
Yes, and
Yeah.
so he asked him to go talk to John Williams about the music
Because George just wanted to put classical music,
he wanted to,
like
yeah,
Wagner or something.
yeah, and like John Williams is like, this ain't gonna work. You gotta have your own original score. And then George Lucas is like, great, you're doing it. And then and then John Williams created the masterpiece that is
I mean, John Williams
music.
was quite reputable before.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
He did Jaws. Like, that's iconic.
and so, yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of stuff going on during that production. It was supposed to come out December of 1976, but they weren't done editing, and yeah, Fox was ready just to cancel, just be like, no, we're
Can it,
done.
Write it off.
We're done. This is not worth it. And then, even when it released, it was selective release. It wasn't everywhere. It was in select theaters around the nation, and it blew up. It
Yeah.
exploded to huge success.
Like Baby Grogu.
Yeah.
I think I forgot. I watched the one documentary about it that said that like they released a book. They released the book before the movie, and that's what got people excited for the movie. Was they had released the book of it beforehand.
Interesting.
It was something like
That's
that, or
smart
it was, or was
marketing.
that a comic book? I think it was a comic book.
Comic book.
Comic
would be
book.
better.
That would make more sense.
And so they did that, and so like huge success, became the most successful movie ever, and it held on to that title for 5 years.
Till what movie?
E.T.
Ah.
E.T. overthrown.
His buddy.
Yep, Spielberg. So during the original, idea of writing the contract with 20th Century Fox, George kind of written off a lot of like, okay, you get the profits, but I want the like merchandising rights,
Which
and
was
things
unheard
like
of because
that.
nobody
cared.
No
It was
one
like,
made any
you-
money
Yeah.
from that.
They're like, sure, yeah, we'll take all the profits from the movie. You can keep the merchandising rights. And boy, did that benefit George Lucas because that paid for everything else. The merchandise, the novelizations, all of that stuff, that paid for Empire Strikes Back, that paid for ILM, that paid for Return of the Jedi, that paid for, everything that George Lucas was about to build. It really paved the way to the point, because the problem that George Lucas hated about the movie industry, he hated how people who were not a part of the creative process had their hands in the cookie jar.
He hates that.
He hated that. He hated the fact that they kept telling him what they needed to put in his movie, what they needed to take out. He's like, George Lucas was a person, I want to tell my story. This is my story I want to share, not yours. And so that went on. So like when he was making Empire Strikes Back, there was a lot of issues with the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, because of the opening crawl. That was a big deal.
Because usually you would see
The credits,
at the beginning.
But it wasn't until after this point. I think there was like a couple other films that had done what George Lucas did, put the credits at the
It was
end.
one of the Disney animated feature films, I think Fox and the Hound or
I
something
think
like
so.
that.
I don't remember which one, but like, yeah, there was like a couple that got away with it, but no way were they going to let George do it for future films. And George was like, well, I'm going to quit everything. I'm going to quit the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild. So that I can make the movie I want to make.
You can't tell me what to do.
Correct. And so he's like, I'm going to pay for everything
It's
myself.
kind of like how Stan Lee broke out of like the comic book kind
Yes.
of group, where it's all like, no, we want to do it this way.
Right.
We're tired of you guys censoring us. We're gonna lose the stamp of approval. That's fine. And the world went on.
Right. And which made things a lot more difficult when it came to the future Star Wars films, because then it meant he had to, because he knew that after the first one, due to medical issues and things like that, he couldn't do it all. He was starting up brand new businesses. He was growing businesses. Like he had like 6 different companies under his name.
Was this when he was moving from Southern to Northern California too?
That happened a little bit later, but
Okay.
I
Skywalker
don't remember the time frame on that.
Yeah.
Because I know they did move after A New Hope, but I don't know if they made it all the way up to Skywalker Ranch at that point.
Yeah.
I think it was afterward that they did that, but I could be wrong. So yeah, then he went on. He would hire his own directors because he's like, I can't do this anymore. Oh, he'll take more of a producer role. He'd take more on the side of running his companies because he had several different companies. He was running ILM, and he was running LucasArts. He was running he was revolutionizing filmmaking. That was what he was doing. And so when it came to Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi, he outsourced hiring some directors. But as they all know, as they all state, George was there just as long as the directors were. He was there every step of the way.
He was backseat driving.
Oh, big time. Big time. Which, caused a strain in his personal relationship with his wife and things like that, which would later impact the future of things. But in the process of making movies, he did other movies besides Star Wars. He was having disagreements with 20th Century Fox about rights and things like that. And so he was talking to his friend, Steven Spielberg, about, hey, I've got this really good idea for a film. I want you to direct it. It's something called Indiana Jones. Have you guys heard of it?
Kind of a big deal.
Kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
And so
So
instead,
they're on a beach in Hawaii on vacation.
right. And then, and so they went to Paramount for that. And so, but that ended up becoming huge success. And then became Harrison Ford's favorite role he's ever played. That was the role that he attached himself more than any other of his other roles.
Which is kind of nuts, where you go from like Han Solo and then you become
Harrison Ford.
became-
Indiana Jones.
you like saying he's Harrison Ford's
He
a
is.
character.
He is.
Yes.
It feels like he is. If you watch his interviews, he feels like a character.
He's got the worst interviews.
He does, but but because they're the worst, they are so funny.
Yeah. He's got one about the merchandising right with David Letterman. That one's tense.
Oh, I bet.
That one, yeah. He was not happy that his likeness was sold so easily and he had none of the money from that.
Yeah.
Right. But at that point,
Oh, well, you're just Indiana Jones now and you've got globs of money there.
I know. But, and then at this point, George Lucas took more of a producer role on things. Like he just basically paid for a bunch of movie projects like Howard the Duck and things like that.
He's that duck that you see randomly in the Marvel films.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep, that's all from George. And so a little bit of throwing this out here
He
after.
did do Willow.
Yeah, Willow is on the list.
you idiot.
Right. And then after Star Wars, I've got to talk a little bit about his Disney projects because he was asked to work with Disney on a couple of different projects at this time. Michael Eisner had just kind of was getting his foothold into like, what can we do to revitalize Disneyland?
Yeah, 85 was a huge, like they redid Fantasyland.
They just finished revitalizing Disneyland, Fantasyland, and they're like, how do we get more teenagers in the park and things like that? And so one of the ideas was a Star Wars ride. And so obviously you had to get George's approval. And George was all like, I can't think of another company that could handle.
He liked Disneyland.
He loved. It was considered his favorite vacation spot was Disney World. So
Disneyland.
Disney World.
Disney World.
I heard Disney World.
Ooh.
Ooh,
I watched a
Competition.
documentary that said Disney World.
cool.
So,
That's cool. That's cool.
but oh yeah, and
He was in Epcot and he's like, I love this.
I love Epcot. I love 80s Epcot.
His like monotone. I love 80s Epcot. I don't know why I'm calling 80s Epcot. It's the 80s.
80s Epcot, man.
It was a great time.
And a fun fact of George Lucas and Disney is that he was there the real opening day of Disneyland, July 18th of 1955. He was there.
He was the one jumping over the fence.
Yeah.
No.
No, that was the day before at the media event. But so, yeah, he did that. And then he was also asked to help make a new show for Disney, a little show known as Captain EO with Michael Jackson.
Scooter.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just talking to my wife about that actually last night, and she's like, I have no idea what Captain EO is. I'm like, oh, you got to watch Captain EO. It's like one of the coolest music videos like ever. Coolest dancing. I love it. It's so
Yeah, you
fun.
watch it and you're like, when you're older and you're just like, wow, this is really ambitious.
Very, very. Like it is a crazy
It's next
show.
level for
It is.
sure.
Definitely
The production was
experimental.
good.
But throughout this time in the 80s, shortly after, I believe, it was either during or after Return of the Jedi came out, his wife left him.
Just like, peace.
She was just kind of done. She had fallen out of love with him. And so that left him with his daughters, or his daughter. He later would adopt another daughter and a son. But he decided to focus more on family time with that was what was important to him, was raising his children. That was a very integral part of his life. His kids known, like everyone else thinks of him as this like reclusive.
He's the Star Wars guy.
He's the Star Wars guy. He's like keeps to himself. He's not very like conversational, and his kids are like, oh no, he's like out there and like happy and talking with everyone almost too much. And so
they know a
it's-
different,
Yeah.
different George.
They see a different George, and so they're like, yeah, he was like almost there too much. As any teenager would say about their parents, being like, oh, my parents are there too much. But and so that was his thing. And they always talked about how, like, he was always home for dinner, always drove the kids to school. Like family was a big part of his life. And then when he got into the 90s, as his kids were getting older, you know, he was feeling more up to the idea of continuing telling more Star Wars tales. So he put to task ILM, which at this time had, you know, skyrocketed in its movie building magic of, you know, Jurassic Park and things like that, like incredible work in terms of developing new special effects, and says, let's remaster the original series. So that's where we get the special editions from. And that was kind of the prep work that they wanted to warm them up for the big changes that were going to come when George said we're going to make the prequel trilogy. So
That's where we're at.
that's where we're at.
Okay, I didn't know if you were gonna roll into. I was all like, let me go through.
I wasn't.
notes as I was going.
I'll mention the special editions because that's beforehand, but it does play a part.
It does
in
play a
the
part of
prequel
it. So
story.
yeah, George goes and goes, I didn't want to go back and write one of these movies unless I had the technology available to really tell the kind of story I was interested in telling. He explained later, I wanted to be able to explore the world I created to its fullest, so I waited until I had the technology means to do that. And then he sat down in 94 in November, and he
Right.
planned to write all 3 movies. And then he was going to take a year and write them, and a year to prepare them, and a year to shoot them. That's not what happened. We all have a plan, right?
No.
It's like the
no.
beginning of the school year, and you're like, oh, this is the year. I'm going to have all my stuff organized. I'm
Yeah.
going to do all my homework. I'm going to wake up on time.
I'm gonna use my planner to plan out on my schedule.
Exactly. No,
No.
it didn't work out like that. George, he had little chance of being. He goes. There's little chance that you're gonna get me to be in the director's chair. Writing is miserable. You know, it's just his directing was the one part of the filming process he dreaded the most. Not largely because it required him to be away from his children for long stretches. He ended up being the director.
Yes, he did.
Um,
Because he likes to have his hand in all the cookie jars.
Yeah, so the first rough draft was finished in 95, and then they first started doing the shooting. It was known as The Beginning. And then he was able to do computerized animatronics to pre-visualize the entire film before it even started shooting. So that's kind of like a next step for that. This part, they call it, of his biography, the age of digital, or digitalized. Yeah.
Right.
And so with that, he went back to his old films, and they pull them all out, and like the film was so bad. They like had to clean it up on the computer and redo it and reshoot some of the things.
Yep.
You know, but he made some good money from it.
It shot back up to being one of the most like profitable films after that release.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he made. I had it right here. Well, I'll move on.
Numbers don't matter.
Yeah, he tried to
Made a lot of money.
He's like, well, we're just he wanted to get this out before the 20th. He wanted for the 20th anniversary, and I thought
Right.
that I was like, that was the 20th. That was almost 30 years ago. Yeah, he wanted to get it out there and put his touch in there. And while he was in there, he touched a famous scene. It was the Greedo Han Solo scene.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the original one, Han shot first.
Mm-hmm.
But George Lucas goes, you know what? That really doesn't go with his character overall arc. So I'm going to change it. And it set the Star Wars nerds off.
Yeah.
it did.
Who shot?
Who shot? Like,
First.
yeah, Han shot first. And later on, he would find himself wearing one of those shirts later on. But people made shirts and stickers like, Han shot first. And, like, they were mad that they messed that he was this, like, cowboy, you know, for it. Later on, he would later announce he started using the internet more
Yeah.
before. And he started going off like, he released, was like, I'm going to direct the prequels. And everyone's like, oh, it's amazing. He's going to do it. There was this building hype for episode
I remember
1.
that. That was like, I was so pumped for episode 1.
Yeah, and so for this, he did something different. He got big celebrities in there.
He did.
Got Samuel Jackson's like put me in there. I don't care. Just put me in a stormtrooper costume. I don't care. I want to be in there. It was a Jedi. And then they got Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson
That's
was big.
huge.
That was a big one.
And then here's this with Jar Jar Binks. He received a phone call from Michael Jackson
Right.
wanting to play the role. And you imagine it's like, Misa Jar Jar Binks.
Do you think Michael Jackson would have done a better job?
No.
No, it was just a hated character. And the sad thing is with Jar Jar Binks, George Lucas had like 2 words to describe him, and like everyone's like, I hate this character. And he's just like, the people creating this character or the actors going off it really was them really putting themselves into this character off of 2 like silly and clumsy. That's all you got.
Yeah.
So you're just gonna be yourself in that. And yeah, the internet was very cruel with Jar Jar Binks. So they first started filming in 97, and then they, but this was the first time they built blue screens, and actors have never really been on all blue screen sets because George wanted to control so much. And then they got a new puppet because Frank Oz had complained that Yoda was really explicitive heavy. And this is, as you know, learn about Frank Oz. He's not like Elmo.
No.
He tells it as it is. This is during episode 1. They were filming in regular film and digital film and different scenes. And this was where he goes, I'm done with regular film. I'm doing digital film.
Everything went digital.
Because it just prolonged the process, and he was able to control more with the editing of it. There was more computerized programming. You saw there were less circular saws, less smell of glue at ILM. It was hum of servers going. And another big thing, we mentioned merchandise. Everyone was falling over themselves thinking this movie is going to be a cash cow for merchandise, which ended up sending the stock value up $225 million
For Hasbro?
for Hasbro. Lego Group waded in the waters for licensing because of this. This helped Lego bump into, in 2012, the most valuable toy company because they started doing Star Wars toys. And then doing other like
Star Wars toys were huge when the prequel.
There was a revitalization in the 90s for Star Wars toys.
Yeah, we got the ones
It
before
was the Power of the Force series.
Yeah, and they were expecting great things for the merchandise, and it didn't work out.
Didn't do as well as they
Didn't
thought.
do as well. I guess not everybody wanted, Pepsi cans with the characters on them, or toothpaste, or Qui-Gon
Hey,
Jinn tie.
My friend got it all. He got all those Pepsi cans.
I remember he had them. Yeah.
He had the Taco Bell toy display case with Jar Jar Binks from Taco Bell.
He was into it. Yeah. So Hasbro, which paid $650 million for the toy rights for all 3 prequels. And yeah, it did not help. Their stocks tumbled pretty much 25% as a result of just not everyone bought the toys.
There was definitely a falling off after episode 1. The toys, like, because I still have all the toys, and there was a decline, especially on our end.
There was a saturation in the market. Everyone thinks, I'm going to buy it and I'm going to hold on to it like the originals, and I'm going to make so much money. And you can go to your local kind of used bookstores and you can buy it for the exact same price that you could have back in the 90s or the late 90s, 2000s. Because I go there and I'm like, yeah, they're still there. No one wants it now. It's because everyone who was a Star Wars fan bought it, and that meant nobody was going to buy them in the future because they had of it. So yeah, the merchandise didn't do well. The movie it did really well.
It did.
Critics,
right.
they weren't that impressed. Even some of the actors were like, it was kind of flat. It didn't get them. The internet, this is the first time the internet got involved, and it didn't go well.
But does that bother George? No.
Yeah, it does, because he goes, I'm done with the internet. He's
Exactly.
like, I'm done doing promotions.
Yeah.
You guys suck.
exactly. Is him turning off. He's like, I'm making my movies. I don't care.
Yeah. During this time, away from the movies, the Presidio Trust in San Francisco gave him the rights to have like coastal property if he
Right.
developed into his future production company. He went and worked on, and they ended up spending like $350 million and putting all his companies in one place
In San Francisco.
in San Francisco because ILM wasn't even there. You get into the second film. It's called he called it Jar Jar's Great Adventure. Everyone got psyched. It's like, he's a Sith, not a sis. Doctors are like, what? No, he was a Sith. Yeah. There's always that thing. Yeah, George was really bad with his stories. He would show up like a week or two before, like. The actor who plays the Emperor had no lines
Yeah.
to practice. He's like, here's your lines. And he's just like, it's like improv with blue screens. And you're like, I am the Emperor.
Kill him.
Do it.
So, yeah, that is that transition of films where the actors have to interact with just the actors and guys holding
Well-
sticks.
Well, and that was the thing. I mean, at this time, I mean, spoilers were everywhere. And so, like, it wasn't like the first movie was leaked online. Like, everyone knew exactly what every plot point was. Weird Al, when he wrote The Saga Begins parody of American Pie,
Yeah.
those were guesses. The movie hadn't even come out yet. But, like, him, like, telling us the story of Anakin, that was him just doing research online as to what that movie was about.
So there was enough out there.
There was
Yeah.
you listen to the song and it's like, yeah, that's the movie. He got it right. So yeah, George was very much like tight-lipped on everything going forward.
Yeah, so they go with Attack of the Clone. They're going pure digital.
Yeah.
And George loved it. He was able to edit there. Movie, not so great. Here's Ebert. He complained. A gripe that Peter Travers II adding snarkily, Lucas still can't write dialogue that doesn't induce projectile vomiting.
I hate sand.
It's sad. Yeah.
I killed them. The women and the children too.
It was bad. Yeah. While on vacation, while writing ideas for episode 3, again, a script that he gave them at the time of primary, filming. He was writing down ideas for Indiana Jones 4. He opened up later after that movie his Presidio, where I said his new Lucasfilm campus. And in 2005, he received the American Film Institute Lifetime Achievement Award, or Life Achievement Award. And that one's fun to watch because people come in and it's kind of like a mini roast where they tell stories about George because he's very like to himself. And so it's fun to watch those kind of interviews, especially get like stories from Carrie Fisher.
Carrie Fisher's
She's
famous
gold.
for like telling how things really were on set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And after the third movie, Lucas says, I don't have to do a lot of other movies than I want to make. Or he goes, wait, I do have a lot of other movies that I want to make. I don't have an answer to anybody. That's what I've earned to be able to do what I want to do. When Star Wars finished. And, he's in his 50s at this point.
Right.
Yeah. And so this is the phase of like letting go. And so with the prequels generating $2.5 billion, that's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he goes, I'm trying to get back to a place for the company to function without me and Star Wars, that they don't need a genius at the head to run the company. He sees the point. He's like, I can't do this forever. I can't be the center point. I want the legacy to go on without me, and then they start looking into starting a cartoon.
Yep.
They had the Cartoon Network, Star Wars for Clone Wars, and then they also, George got the Clone Wars TV show going,
Right.
they were costing between $700,000 to $1 million to make, and he thought like everyone's going to be falling over themselves to get a Star Wars TV show. No one wanted it. No one.
Well,
Even Cartoon Network was like, no. And the way they got them to do it is if they did a movie to launch it.
right.
The movie did bad.
Right.
But the TV show, when it was released, it was the highest rating TV release of the time for Cartoon Network. And so they were able to continue it on until Disney picked it up. So he goes, says, the galaxy grew so large, in fact, that Lucasfilm eventually hired its own staff to keep tabs and catalog everything, though it was George Lucas and Lucas alone who would ultimately decide what it was considered to be canon, that is officially part of the Star Wars universe. It's like it always went through George still.
Yeah.
It's funny. There's a funny video of somebody, talking to George Lucas. He says, "Oh, it's a great pleasure to talk with you." And the creator of Mara Jade, and he goes, "I didn't create Mara Jade. Ah,
Yeah.
Get out of here!"
He gets mad. That's a book creation, and so at this point you start getting them in Indiana Jones, and so Indiana Jones 4 had this long history. It starts back in '94 where George wants to do Indiana Jones and like aliens, and the first name was called Indiana Jones and the Saucer Man up from Mars. And it got scrapped. And then they're like, how about Indiana Jones and the City of the Gods? Nah. How about Indiana Jones and the Atomic Ants? Nah. What's another name we could do? Indiana Jones and the Destroyer of Worlds. Nah, we gotta do that one.
Indiana Jones and the Swinging Monkeys.
Yeah, no. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of Crystal Skulls. And Spielberg's like, no, only one skull. And they're like, okay, fine. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of Crystal Skull. Like, Spielberg didn't want to do an alien film. Harrison Ford was like, I don't know about this. So they went through so many different scripts to get to this point.
It was a rough pull to get this fourth movie going.
Yeah, and they were like, one of the goals was like, Spielberg's going to direct it. And he wanted to do it in film, which drove
George.
Lucas up the wall. He was
Yep.
like, no,
Yeah.
I want digital. And that didn't go well. Like, it was hard for George in the control, but
He lost
and they wanted
control
like,
of
we
it,
want
yeah.
minimal, CGI. And as you watch them film, you're going, yeah, that didn't happen. Swinging monkeys, flying refrigerators,
The ants.
the ants crawling over.
Yeah.
It was, when you watch it, you go like, yeah, I like the melting wax guy. Can we go back to that? Or the heart coming out of the chest, good old CGI effects right there, or the old effects there. It did all right.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, let's
Fan-
make another one immediately.
Fans were not 100% on board for that one.
So in 2012, or no, let's see, he does one more movie. It's called The Red Tails. He wanted to make it.
Oh, right, that's right.
He wanted to do a
that.
trilogy.
I forgot about that.
He got really jaded from the movie industry. They were just like, you can't make a movie trilogy without like one race. Just like, it's not going to make any money, and it pretty much got tanked. And it didn't do well. The critics didn't like it. And they're
That was
like,
okay.
yeah,
That was
people.
okay.
Well, they're like, this is typical George. It showed George Lucas's kind of dimension.
Sure.
And they were just like, this doesn't work. But you know what? It got the ball rolling, to have, larger African American history pieces. But yeah, at that point, he was like, I'm done. I'm retiring. And around this time, he gets a visit from Bob Iger. He's like,
hey, let's have a lunch.
let's have a lunch while you're here at Disney World. And they went to the Brown Derby.
Because they were promoting the new Star Tours.
Yes, so new Star Wars came out in 2012, and so they were there at Hollywood Studios, Disney World, went to Brown Derby, and Bob goes, hey, you want to
thoughts?
sell? Huh? You want to
Have
sell?
have you ever considered selling?
Yeah.
I think that was kind of the approach. Was like, I'm gonna plant the seed and then step back.
Yeah.
It was, He goes, I'm not ready to pursue that now, but when I do, I'd love to talk. And that's when he started getting, the ball rolling with getting Kennedy doing the co-chair at Lucasfilm. you know, people are like, "Hey, Kennedy!" It's like Lucas picked her,
Yeah.
and she had
Well,
done
she's-
successful things throughout the
she
history.
has-
She'd been there from the beginning, and I think it was more of a trusting. Like,
I trust you.
I
to
trust
handle
you
things,
because
Yeah.
you know how I like it.
But
Yeah, we learned that's not true. Yes. Eventually, you know, still Lucas thought the partnership with Disney made sense in a way. It brought his own life full circle. He had after all, been at Disneyland on day one, and in the 80s proudly brought Star Wars to the Disney parks. You know, and so on October 30th, 2012, the cameras rolling captured the occasion. George Lucas, Walt Disney Company President Bob Iger signed an agreement selling Lucasfilm to Disney for a staggering $4.05 billion. Half in cash, half in stock. And the stock back then was $50 and it's now $90. So if he still has all those stocks, he has doubled his return there and just that. And at that point, he owned 2% of the current shares, which is at 40 million. So 40 million shares is 2%. And Steve Jobs we still got more.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
They did.
We have more. Yeah.
Well, that because of Pixar.
Yeah. You know, part of the agreement.
That's a whole other issue.
That's another story.
George wanted the Pixar.
He wanted the
deal.
Pixar treatment, and he's all like, "Well,
You're not the same
you're
level.
not producing every year, you know." And yeah, that was another comparison.
Uh-huh.
You know, and so at this point, one of the agreements was George wanted his ideas for the new movies to be done. He gave him an idea, and there was some conflict where like Disney's like, yeah, you want your cake and eat it too, and we're not doing that. So we have final say, and it was like a divorce for him, and it was really hard to let Star Wars go. I think what helped was he got married.
Yes, he did.
He got married, and then he had his first biological child.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it says it was Lucas's first biological child, Everest Hobson Lucas, in 2013. And so he got
name his kid Jar Jar?
No.
Come on.
He's a Jar Jar Lucas. He's gonna be in the first grade.
Oh.
You know, Lucas, you know, he vowed to donate a bulk of his wealth in 2010 with that pledge of like, hey, I die, I'm going to donate it to philanthropy. He's tried to set up a museum, and that's been squashed in San Francisco and Chicago, and he's just learned nobody wants a museum. He has got all his artwork and all his stuff he wants to share with the world and kind of like have a place of his history, and the world's like, nah, we don't want it.
Yeah.
And that's nuts. That's crazy.
So crazy.
They just, and
Because
they're like, we'll
the
pay for
fans-
the locate, we'll pay. And
The
they're like,
Star Wars
no.
fans would show.
Without
They
a
are.
doubt.
They would go, yeah.
They go to Rancho Obi-Wan, which is this fan-made museum of action figure toys. I think it's up in Washington or something like that. Like they go there, and you know, to a little Star Wars makeshift toy museum. But you know, no, we don't want to look at original Star Wars artwork.
He's willing to spend $1 billion. You know, at the time, that's like a sports stadium, and they're like, nah, we don't want
You just
it.
gotta go to a small town.
I think
Honestly, go to a small town.
he wants to be a destination within a big city. He doesn't want to have this overhead. He wants to be able to sustain its own like self.
Yeah.
At this point, he's just retired, and he's just being a dad.
Yep.
And you know, he does say on his epitaph he wants to read, "I was a great dad."
Yep.
That's what he wants. He does say, what does he write? Sorry, brain fart. You know, a lot of people say he's going to be remembered, or he should get a lot of credit for transitioning the movie industry into the digital age. That's where his legacy should be. It's not really like Star Wars. it should be.
Star Wars was just the tipping point.
It's
to his true impact.
Yeah.
Like all the Trekkers or whatever, they're all like, oh, Star Trek's better. You wouldn't have this Star Trek that you know today.
No, you'd be stuck in the
without
60s still.
George Lucas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the impact and the influence of Star Wars. I mean, on a census in the United Kingdoms, with the amount of write-ins for their religion, Jedi was written 400,000 times, and that made it the fourth largest religion in the
England.
UK.
Yeah.
Was Jedi. It's not even a real it's not even like
Legitimate.
a structured religion.
It's just people saying that they're Jedi.
They're based off of When I was in boot camp, you could do a Jedi service,
Oh,
and you
really?
could put Jedi on your dog tag. And I was all like, do you have to be cremated and have all your peers watch you as you're cremated?
I did watch a video about this guy. He did go to a Star Wars church, and he's like, it was interesting,
If we'd be
They
kind
had
of
lightsaber fights, and it's like, all right, this is something.
you're having a sermon and then a Sith shows up and it's all like everyone gets up and fights. Lucas, when people ask him, is all like, what do you think about fans saying, the prequels aren't the best, and he goes, it's a work of fiction, it's a metaphor, it's not real, he said matter-of-factly, and therefore you can either like it or not like it or whatever. He didn't take it too seriously.
Nope.
He goes, it's still just a story. It's not life,
Yeah.
and so
Well, it goes back to him. It's like, I want to be known to be a dad.
yeah,
That's what's real. Star Wars is cool, but
it's that's it's fiction. There's reality.
yeah.
And when I was reading about like his influence with his kids and how how being a dad was so important, you see that with Walt. You see that with Jim Henson.
Yes.
How
100%.
they're not all like, I'm throwing myself just into my work. You see these creative giants, and being a dad was part of that creative experience and prioritizing that. And I thought that was really cool, seeing another good example of someone super creative, being, a normie, being a dad, doing the dad life. And I thought that was really cool. I really enjoyed learning about his second part of his life. So that's what I got.
Yeah.
Closing out. He's still alive.
He's
Yeah.
still around.
He's still around.
He's 80.
He's still He still has say in the Star Wars world, and
But he's definitely a person. I would put him on par with a person like Walt Disney in terms of the impact of his role on the way we consume entertainment.
yes.
He was a visionary of how special effects worked, the digital era, like you name it. George Lucas, like Pixar, that came from ILM, his influence has truly changed the way we analyze and storytell and look at everything when it comes to the movie industry.
Creating a universe
Cinematic
with stories that
universe.
break off like nobody did that before.
Nope.
Yeah. So it was great to do some research on George Lucas and to kind of get to know him better. Let us know if you learned something new about George Lucas, or maybe a fun fact that we didn't say.
He likes tacos. No, I don't know if he likes tacos. Fun facts like that are always like, one time I saw him drop a napkin and he didn't pick it up. He's a litter bug. Let us know.
Yeah. You can follow us all on our social media. You can email us at matterhornyellers@gmail.com. But with that being said, have a magical day.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Matterhorn Yodelers. Please remember, before your bobsled comes to a complete stop, to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And remember,
Remain seated, please. Permanecer sentados, por favor.